So, as I say every year, with every best of the year list comes a worst of the year list. Today, we're going to be talking about the worst movies of 2024. And I get that for many, that's like sacrilege. You can't do that anymore. But not on this channel. I do it every year. And it's going to be a long, continued tradition until the day I die because these filmmakers, they need to know how bad it was if they don't already, especially three of them that are on this list. And one of these movies might shock you, but as always, we have dishonorable mentions. Of course, I didn't see the worst of the worst this year, although I don't know, my number one might be the worst of the worst for me this year, but there's movies on here that were critically panned that I just didn't see. I didn't go out of my way to see. Usually I do so I can fill up the list, but I didn't this year. But we do have dishonorable mentions, and those are Imaginary, The Union, Atlas, Joker Folie à Deux, Night Swim, It's What's Inside, Unfrosted, Lisa Frankenstein, ISS, Drive Away Dolls, Back to Black, Apartment 7A, and Red One. Those were some movies that I really did not like this year, but these 10 I absolutely despised more than those. Coming in at number 10. Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver. Do I even remember a single thing about this movie? No, it's really Zack Snyder. And not to, because I know Zack Snyder is a touchy subject here on the internet, but like, can you make a movie that actually has a plot and actually has characters and actually has a story to tell? The thing with Zack Snyder and his movies is that he has good ideas, but he can never execute them as well as he can. And Rebel Moon, The Scargiver, doesn't even feel like that. It just feels like an obligation. It feels like, oh, here's a second one, but there's not really much forward-moving plot developments in this movie until the very end. The action's not very great. I still don't care about the characters. There's not a lot of subtlety. We know Zack Snyder's not good with subtlety, so I hate to say it, if this Rebel Moon universe ends up continuing, I don't think I'm going to be seated. Kraven the Hunter comes in at number 9. What a boring ass movie, huh? I mean, there are moments of this movie you can just laugh at for how bad it is, but then most of the movie is just so bad it's bad. Even Aaron Taylor Johnson feels so out of place in this movie. He feels like he is the one who is actually trying, and then everybody else around him just wants a paycheck. Especially when you look at the comments that the Sony CEO has made lately about how it's not that bad of a movie. It just makes this movie look even worse, and a couple of others that may or may not make this list look even worse as well. Like, what are you doing, man? Like, do you know what a good movie is? I mean, they released the first 8 minutes of it online before release, and even then, it felt like the most choppily edited movie you could ever think of, and it really was when it all came down to it. It just feels like characters start in places where they previously weren't, and the action is just not very good. It was the one that I felt like had the most potential of the Sony Spider-Man universe movies that don't have Spider-Man in it, but unfortunately fell very well short of those expectations. Speaking of the Sony universe of Spider-Man movies that doesn't have Spider-Man in it, I think that this is even more boring than Kraven the Hunter. What's an absolute snooze fest? I'm not big on the Venom movies anyways. The second one is probably the best because it has that cheesy, silly 90s, early 2000s feel to it, but even this couldn't capture that. For most of this movie, I'm just bored shitless. There's not a lot that feels like it happens in this movie, even though there is a constantly moving plot, but the action just feels really tedious. The action feels really boring. And by the time the movie starts to pick up towards the end, it feels too little, too late. Tom Hardy looks really tired in this movie. He looks like he's just collecting a paycheck here. If you like the Venom movies, then fine. But for me, they haven't really worked out. And Venom: The Last Dance proved that. If you like really shitty action movies that come out on streaming, then Canary Black is definitely up your alley. This was an Amazon Prime movie that felt like it should have been released on Netflix. I don't know what it is with streaming services just releasing run-of-the-mill generic action movies, but it's almost as if they just have to take somebody who is an action star or was an action star and just plop them into the most generic and asinine thing they can think of, and that is Canary Black. I didn't care about any of the characters. The plot is so convoluted that there's just so much happening where you just lose sight of what is actually happening. I can't believe Ray Stevenson was in this movie. Can you believe that? I sure can't. I said in my best movies of the year list that horror was on a kick this year. Not with this movie. Tarot was awful because this is like that Truth or Dare movie or Slender Man or something where they'll just take something that could be tangible or a tangible object and try to make a horror movie out of it, like that movie Wish with a wishing box. Something like that. That is exactly what tarot tries to do, except with tarot cards. And there's nothing about it that screams, this is scary. Because it's not scary. It's just teenagers being stupid, making dumb decisions, as they always do in these types of movies, and the movie trying to convince you that they're actually being smart when they're not. That's tarot for you. If that scares you, then you must scare really easily. All right, more Netflix bullshit, and that is Lift. Generic, run-of-the-mill action movie. Once again, I feel like so many Netflix movies make this list year in and year out for me because that's exactly what they are. They don't know how to script an actual action movie. Carry On being the exception this year because that was actually pretty decently written and had some really good thrills and some good action in it. But Lift, no, and immediately I'm bored. The cast that is assembled should have all the chemistry in the world, but even then, they don't. And I don't care about a single one of these characters. How did F. Gary Gray go from making big budget Hollywood blockbusters for major studios to having an action movie dumped on a streaming service? You see what I mean? Being a big theatrical director and then making a movie for streaming is like being a big theatrical director and then being downgraded to making straight to DVD movies. That's what this is. Number 4 is Borderlands. Oh boy, do I even remember anything about this? If you ask anybody who's played the game, I'm guessing they're gonna say it's nothing like the video game. Eli Roth clearly did not play the video game. You know that when Edgar Ramirez shows up in a movie, it's probably not gonna be that great. I hate to say it. Cate Blanchett looks so out of place in this movie. Everybody else is just like, let's just make Guardians of the Galaxy, but put it in like a Mad Max wasteland or something. That's what this was, and throw some like fantastical elements into it, which probably happens in the game, but is executed so poorly in the movie to the point where it doesn't even feel like you were watching something from the same property. Do you know what I mean? Everybody looks tired. Eli Roth didn't want to make this movie. Apparently, it was changed during post-production or pre-production, whatever it was, and it wasn't the movie that was intended to be made, and you can definitely tell. Number 3 is another Netflix action movie trying to bring back a has-been actress in a starring role. Okay, the trigger warning. Yeah, all right. You would think something called Trigger Warning would actually have a lot of trigger warnings in it. No. Instead, it's an action thriller starring Jessica Alba, and her acting ability has not improved since the last time we saw her, or in her entire career, for that matter. Do I really have to say anything about this movie? You should know what this movie is just from it being on this list. Netflix garbage. Number 2 should probably be number 1, but like I said, my number 1 is going to shock you. But number 2, Madam Web. How can it not be on this list? It's weapon time, people. Like, Madam Web has to be on this list. Clear cut. I think I said this in my review. I didn't even see this at the theater. I didn't care to. I pirated it. And thank God, because I could just turn it off, walk out of my house, scream up at the sky, walk back in, and not finish it. But I finished it. And that's a big reason why it's actually number 2 and not number 1, because I didn't finish the number 1 movie, which kind of invalidates it. But Madam Web, like when you lie to your entire cast and say it's part of the MCU, and then Dakota Johnson, who I've never really liked anyways, sleepwalks her way through this movie. Isabella Merced sleepwalks her way through this movie. Sydney Sweeney sleepwalks her way through this movie. You have this villain who sounds like a discount Adam Driver, who is the most generic villain ever, but yet they try to make him menacing. You should be on a worst of the year list. You should not be released. You should be canceled for a tax write-off. Too bad Zaslav, as much as I hate him, wasn't in charge of this movie. All right, so like I said, my number 1 movie is going to shock you. I'm not going to say what it is, and I'm not going to give really any details of it. I'll just say, I did a short review of it, and it being number 1 probably invalidates its placement on any list or that short review, since I walked out of it. It's the only movie I walked out of this year, and it's going to shock you as to what it is. My number 1 pick for worst movie of the year is I hated Anora. I'm sorry. I hated it. I know it's critically acclaimed. I know it's well regarded in a lot of film buff spaces, but I just couldn't stand this movie. I thought it was the most annoying movie of the year. I hate these types of movies, with a couple of exceptions, like Uncut Gems. They're movies that I dub the new subgenre of idiot characters yelling and screaming at each other for theatrical runtimes. That's exactly what Anora is. There's a sequence in the middle of this movie that is about 20 to 25 minutes, and it's exactly that. Just idiots yelling at each other. I don't like any of the characters in this movie. They're all bumbling assholes, and they're all bumbling idiots. I don't really see what the message being told here is. I think that there's a very hollow grasp as to what is being told. Like I said, the characters, how stupid do you have to be thrown into the situation? Okay? I just don't get the universal praise that Anora is getting, and I just don't get how anybody thinks that this is like on the short list for Oscars, because it is the most annoying film of the year, and it's one of the most annoying movies I've ever seen. It's a movie that I went to go see at Alamo Drafthouse. I paid my check and walked out before the movie finished, because it didn't feel like there was a forward progression of the plot. It was just stripper falls in love with a Russian oligarch's son. That dude just goes on a drunken rampage, and now the family's gangster friends and her have to go find him. That's the entire movie to me, and it was just so boring, tedious, overlong, and just didn't interest me in one bit, because everybody is yelling and screaming at each other, and they're all idiots. There's my other short review for Anora as to why I hated it. It is easily my least favorite movie of the year. Sometimes it might be the most well-made movie on this list, but sometimes even the worst movie will be your least favorite of the year. There's a difference between least favorite and worst, just like there's a difference between favorite and best, and that is Anora for me. So what are your picks for worst movies of the year? Let me know in the comments below. I will leave my link to my website in the description below as well. You guys are the best. Thank you for watching. My name is Alex Madden, and I will see you at the movies somewhere.